In this final section, we will consider another very important issue: migration. Birds don't often stay in one locality. They are nomads, or they migrate or travel to take advantage of developing food resources. So we must concern ourselves with the matter of migration. Mostly it helps to know if a bird is migratory, so we can know when it's likely to be present in the area we are visiting. For wildlife managers, though, corridors through which migrants can travel and feed during seasonal oscillations are important, and sometimes landholders may need to be encouraged to consider remnants of natural habitat that will contribute to corridors. Migration is a worldwide phenomenon that has its origins in the long-distant past. Millions of years ago, mobile organisms began to respond to variations in food availability, which resulted from annual oscillations in global climate. In time, those responses became hardwired and innate. For some species, climate change and continental drift have made those annual migrations particularly hazardous. Small birds like swallows are committed to cross vast deserts like the Sahara without refreshment and so risk exhaustion and starvation. Partial migration is very common in the southern continents. In some species, the population at higher altitudes tends to be migratory and will often winter at lower altitudes. The migrating birds bypass the altitudes where other populations may be sedentary, where suitable wintering habitats may already be occupied. Bird migration is primarily, but not entirely, a Northern Hemisphere phenomenon. Land birds in high northern latitudes of Europe and Asia, where food becomes scarce in winter, leave for areas further south, including the Southern Hemisphere, to overwinter. For some Tasmanian birds, avoiding a chilly Tasmanian winter by travelling to the northern mainland may seem like a good survival strategy, but it is fraught with danger. Along the way, the birds must face the potential of bad weather, blowing them off course, or exhausted and starving after arriving at their destination, finding poor conditions and little food. Perhaps the annual movement between the mainland and Tasmania is an innate legacy that had its origins in the past. The island was joined to the mainland of Australia until the end of the last glacial period, about 10,000 years ago. Sadly, both species of parrot seen here are counted amongst our most threatened birds. Only in the highlands of southeastern Australia are winters predictably harsh enough for a significant number of species to justify the effort of annual migration. Many go as far north as North Queensland and New Guinea. In spring, they return to breed because conditions which produce hard winters also produce a flush of flowers and insects in the spring. Cowells are known to parasitize up to a dozen other bird species, though they chiefly target wattlebirds and orioles. Channelbills are probably the largest cuckoos in the world, with a wingspan of almost a metre. They chiefly parasitize currawongs and crows, usually with only one young, but up to 3 have been known. Cuckoo pairs often work as a team. The male bird distracts or provokes the target hosts, who attempt to chase him away while the female slips in to lay an egg in the host nest. Some cuckoos steal a host egg so that the total number in the nest remains the same. A newly hatched intruder chick murders any competitors. Generally, cuckoos will only lay in a nest that already has an egg or eggs already present. An empty nest is likely to be destroyed by the host or abandoned. The rufous fantail arrives in Shoalhaven in about October. It leaves in February and March. It prefers wet forest and mangroves and tends to forage on the ground. The scarlet honeyeater travels north as far as New Caledonia. It arrives in spring and returns to the north in about February or March. It is somewhat dispersed or relatively uncommon here. Principal food trees are eucalypts, melaleucas and banksias. Southeastern coastal districts tend to be reasonably mild, though there are some seasonal variations in food supply between the coast and the Blue Mountains, so many small honeyeaters tend to be more nomadic than truly migratory in their search for food. Noisy firebirds, however, seem to find advantage in the north-south oscillations. They like to forage in the tops of tall trees like eucalypts and gophers and melaleucas for nectar and insects, rather than in lower bushy shrubs like grevilleas. Orioles have very broad diet from fruit and berries to insects, generally found in the high canopy of tall trees and woodland. Leaden flycatchers are essentially insectivorous and forage close to the ground in moist forest and mangroves. We also see trans-world migrants, godwits from the Arctic Circle travelling to southern Australia. We see latitudinal oscillations, cuckoos from Cape York to southeastern New South Wales and Victoria, or swift parrots from Tasmania to the mainland. We also see altitudinal oscillations, honeyeaters from highlands to the coast or north coast. We see nomadism in desert dwellers like budgerigars, in water birds like stilts, avocets, swans and pelicans. Reasons for movement are primarily for food availability. Often there is an ancestral inherited hardwired pattern, such as we see in the movements from Africa to Europe, across the Sahara and Mediterranean states, across the Bay of Mexico, or across Bass Strait. There are also learned or relearned patterns, cranes and geese in North America. Not all members of a population in mild climate zones resort to movements. Some are sedentary or too young and inexperienced to leave, and most habitats will continue to support lower numbers. Many birds, like some honeyeaters, are catholic in their diet and very adaptable, so shortage of one component is not necessarily a problem. Other birds, like finches, are very fussy and unable to exploit alternative resources, so remembering where and when their food resource is becomes critical. Fussy feeders are likely to be very vulnerable to environmental changes brought about by human activity. The timescale required to adapt to environmental change can take thousands of years and may never be possible for some species. This diagram encapsulates foraging options for birds that exploit flowering trees and shrubs. In a discrete locality that is very diverse ecologically, it will allow a population to be largely sedentary year-round, as something somewhere close will provide a feeding opportunity. Flowers provide nectar, which also attracts many insects, so even if you aren't a nectar feeder, insects may also be plentiful. This diagram is obviously a pretty coarse representation. Flowering cycles do not fit neat little boxes of time. There is often significant overlap and variations due to seasonal variations. In some years, a eucalypt, for example, may fail to flower altogether, or flower in a very limited way. The diagram can necessarily show only a limited number of plant species, neglecting altogether small shrubs like grevilleas, which are particularly important for many of the smaller honeyeaters like spinebills and New Hollands. However, the concept of year-round opportunities still holds good. So here we have a possible alternative to being a nomad or a migrant, where climate may be benign and has been for thousands of years, and where the area's ecological structure is very diverse. So a fundamental part of being an observer is to study what is already known about a species' biology and habits. You must also reinforce this study by recording your own observations. Some expert observers will say your notebook ranks equally in importance to your binoculars. It can be onerous writing it all down, but comprehensive notes are very important. Location, date, time of day, weather are just as important as the species you think you saw, and unless you are 100% confident of your identification, don't be afraid to add a little query sign beside the bird's name. It is still important to record it.